Hi, I'm Alan Rusbridger, editor of Prospect Magazine, and you're about to watch the interview portion of the latest episode of Media Confidential with myself and Lionel Barber, in which we speak to a special guest. If you want to watch the full episode, please click on the link below, and if you want to subscribe to Prospect Magazine, please visit our website at www.prospectmagazine.co.uk. Enjoy. We're thrilled now to be joined by Margaret Sullivan, editor, political editor, reader's editor, public editor, and all-round sage on the media. Welcome to Media Confidential. I was in New York last week and everyone had very long faces. How bad is this with the media?
We would prefer not to live in an autocracy. So in that sense, it's pretty bad. I mean, I can't say that I'm shocked by what happened in the election, but it's not good news because whatever your politics or your policy beliefs are, Trump is a dangerous figure. And, then there's also the question of how well did the news media actually do um, in holding him accountable, and how well will it do in the future? So, yeah, I would say that there's reason for concern for sure.
Let's start with the forward-looking stuff. So you wrote a column recently in which you went through the press, the implications of the press for the networks, the suggestion that Trump is going to go after his enemies. How likely do you think that is going to be?
Well, he likes to sue people, and he likes to sue news organizations, and always has. Sometimes he threatens to sue and doesn't follow through. But I think we will see a lot of that. So far, he hasn't been successful in doing so. But as the judicial system changes through his appointments, um, it could that could change. And also, we know that Trump would love to change the protections for the press that come through the precedent set by the case called Times v. Sullivan. No relation to me,
No relation to
but
you.
it is the one that that's you might, and your readers or your listeners might know the expression reckless disregard for the truth, or it basically says that when you are covering a public official, you have a lot of protection unless it can be shown that you really were reckless and that you knew better and went ahead with a bunch of lies anyway. That's a very high bar. And so it and we're thankful for this. It protects the media from making mistakes, for example, or from expressing opinions that may not be popular with public officials. So if that were to change, and because Trump has such a friendly to him Supreme Court right now, it's possible it could change. That would be a really huge change and a really big problem for press coverage.
Because that would mean that you'd have more or less the same libel laws as us, for instance, in the UK.
I think that's right.
Yeah. But you also said in that piece that you thought he might actually go after the networks as well, the networks who he thinks have not been sufficiently deferential to him. What could that look like?
Well, I mean, interestingly, he he has sued. He right now has a suit against CBS News, which aired an interview during the campaign with Kamala Harris, and on its big magazine show, which is called 60 Minutes, and it did some editing, which these magazine shows and TV shows always do. It's nothing really diabolical, but Trump has sued CBS News because he claims that they did some editing to favor her or something. His campaign was also pretty aggressive about going after Saturday Night Live and its parent company, NBC, because Kamala Harris was on as a guest. She had a sort of a cameo there, and they said, we demand equal time. And in fact, they got it. So I think they're going to be aggressive. And we know that Trump has certain people around him, including Steve Bannon, who believe and have said that they think the opposing party to the Republicans, to the MAGA people, is not Democrats or progressives, it's the media. So they see the media as the true opposition. And so, they've actually been very, very successful in changing people's point of view about journalism and about the media. And that is regrettable. And, all this stuff about, this is the enemy of the people and all that kind of very disparaging stuff has had its effect. And I'll just tell a quick story. When I was still working for the Washington Post, and that was just a couple of years ago, I was doing some interviewing in a red, that is Republican part of New York State. And I introduced myself to a potential source as a reporter or a writer for the Washington Post. And his immediate response to me was, "Oh, so fake news." So this has sort of sunk in, I think, with a lot of regular people and caused them to have even more mistrust in the news media.
Margaret, you've mentioned quite correctly that Donald Trump is good at making threats. He's done it all his life, whether a businessman or a politician.
Yes.
But I wonder whether it's not more likely than rather getting into a big constitutional argument or trying to change the law, that his real game is to intimidate the press, to cow the media. And therefore, that's more likely what's going to happen.
I think that's a great observation, and it is undoubtedly already happening. We saw this I guess it was just last week, when these two very popular political talk show hosts, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski from the show Morning Joe, made a pilgrimage. They have been very anti-Trump on their very popular show, which is on MSNBC, a liberal or at least left-leaning network. And because they feared recrimination from him, I think that's pretty clearly the reason, they made a pilgrimage to Trump's Florida headquarters, if you will, Mar-a-Lago, and had a 90-minute meeting with him that had a very, it had a real kissing the ring aspect to it. It's not like they came back with some no holds barred interview or something. It was just about trying to appease. And that speaks to exactly what you're suggesting, that there's a kind of obeying in advance here that is not healthy. And we know that, if we're going to do our jobs, we have to have a stiff spine, and we have to not, not cower.
Yeah, it's an accommodation, isn't it? It's that point of view which says, look, Trump's won. He swept the Congress. He's got a majority, big majority in the Senate, slimmer majority in the House of Representatives. He won the popular vote. And he's there for the next 4 years. And we're the media, we need access. So, who's going to be, in your pick, you're an astute observer of the media in America, who are the ones with the stiffest spines?
Well, I would have said, in the Marty Baron era that the Washington Post had a very stiff spine. I'm not so sure anymore. And this isn't answering your question.
You're not talking about my former colleague at the Financial Times, are you? William Lewis, the publisher of the Washington Post?
Sir William.
Oh, that's a whole other issue. Yes, Sir William. Well, I don't think he was a great choice, but be that as it may.
But you make an important point, Margaret, because there's going to be almost certainly a new editor, because Matt Murray, formerly of the Wall Street Journal, is only a temporary editor, right?
Yes, he's been appointed in kind of, I don't know whether they call him interim, but that's the feel of it. And so, I was once the top editor of a publication. It was my hometown daily paper, the Buffalo News. And my publisher would say, and I think correctly, that the most important role of a publisher is to appoint the editor. And they honestly don't have a lot of other tasks that I've ever been able to figure out. But I think it'll be instructive to see who Sir Will appoints as editor, since that his role is publisher. And will Jeff Bezos be involved in that as well? And we've seen that Bezos hasn't had the, his pulling of that editorial at the last moment. Washington Post had an editorial for endorsing Kamala Harris. And at the very last minute, Jeff Bezos saw to it that that was withdrawn. And so, I don't, if you look at our traditionally leading news organizations, the New York Times and the Washington Post, it's a mixed sort of record, I think. And so in some ways it falls to individuals, and that's a trend that I think we're seeing, is people with individual voices that may be writing on Substack or on some other platform who are, they're able to sort of carve a different path, and it'll be interesting to see there what happens. But I will say that there's a lot of good journalism being done out there. And one of the reasons that the deplorable Matt Gaetz was caused to withdraw as Attorney General choice for Trump was that CNN had done some great reporting, and they uncovered another case of sexual misconduct. And 45 minutes after they called him to ask him about it, he was out. So I think that journalism can be very impactful at this time, but it's going to require some courage.
Talk to us about the platforms, Margaret. So you've got a guy coming in who's going to be regulating the platforms, Brendan Carr, who has said that he believes that all forms of content moderation are censorship. He calls it the censorship cartel. So you've got these platforms who have, most of them, let's put Elon Musk to one side, but most of them are trying to work out how to create a decent space in these social media platforms and in search. And yet they've got this guy coming in who says, no, that's all censorship. How do they respond to that?
Well, I think a lot of the people who say that they don't like censorship and are all about free speech, and Elon Musk has been one of them, ultimately they end up showing that they like the kind of free speech that reflects their point of view, and they aren't really about they're not really free speech warriors in some global way. They're about, look, when you said to set Elon Musk aside, but it's hard to do right now because it seems like he's almost wanting to be the shadow president. He's at Trump's side at every moment. So, when Musk took over Twitter, he was all about free speech. Is that really what ends up happening? And, I'm a proponent of free speech too, but I think there need to be some limitations. And when hateful disinformation is circulating so broadly, we have to be careful. So I don't know what'll happen under Brendan Carr.
But is this going to lead to two Facebooks and two Googles? And, you've got European Facebook, which has got to apply by all the European rules, and American Facebook, which is going to have to apply by American rules. And this idea of one internet is going to be dissolved.
Well, I'm not sure it's been such a great thing anyway. So.
Go on. You mean the overall effect of social media?
Yeah, the overall effect of social media, and even, even the overall effect of the internet on the news media, because, a great interest of mine has been what's happened to local newspapers and local news generally. And I think that the demise of local news is actually a big story that's behind a lot of the problems for American democracy. It's a little bit unacknowledged, but there was a time when we had a little bit more of a common ground to walk on, because we all shared a lot of the same facts and beliefs. But, as that's gone away, everybody's run into their tribal corners. And I do think that social media and the internet are the causes of that. I mean, there's, you can't turn back the clock, but it is important to know what's happening.
One other column you wrote recently said that the line between Fox News and the government has more or less vanished. Can you just unpack that a little for us?
So, Fox News, owned by Rupert Murdoch, founded by Murdoch at least, has been a huge factor in the turning of the U.S. in this rightward direction. And throughout, I think it's fair to say that there is no President Donald Trump in 2016 or 2024 without Fox News. It's that powerful, that important, and that influential. And so one of the things that happened a lot during the initial Trump administration is that there was a revolving door from Fox to the Trump administration. In other words, if you were just one example, a guy named Bill Shine, who was a top executive at Fox News, became Trump's communications director. And there were many, many examples of that. And that is happening again. In fact, Trump, one of the things Trump loves is people who've been on TV or are on TV. That's just speaks to his very heart and soul as a reality TV star himself. And so his recent choice or pick for defense secretary, someone who will run the Pentagon, which has nearly 3 million employees, is Pete Hegseth. So Pete Hegseth is basically a Fox News host. And while he does have, he was in the military, and it's not that he's completely disconnected from the military, but he's never run anything, much less, this huge military organization. And he, like many others who've been chosen, have allegations of sexual misconduct in their past. So he's a terrible choice. But it's another example of this kind of very permeable wall between Fox and Trump. And he just loves to choose these people who've been on TV.
Yeah, because they're great performers, and he sees the personality as far more important than policy. What matters is you've got the audience and you can express yourself in a charismatic way, as long as you're not too charismatic vis-a-vis Trump. But Margaret, you make a very important point about Fox, and I suppose the other person in that drama was who really created Fox News was Roger Ailes. And Roger Ailes was
Absolutely.
the key Republican operator, did the Southern Strategy in 68. Brilliant. And I always remember him saying to a friend of mine that one particular Indiana governor could not ever be a president in the White House, Mitch Daniels, because his ears were too actually stuck out, wouldn't fit in the television screen. But there we go.
Right. Yes, exactly. No, it was Roger Ailes really began this whole thing by consulting with Richard Nixon and, making the point to him that he needed to conquer the new, at that time, television media world. And Nixon wasn't particularly good on TV, especially when he went up against telegenic sorts like John F. Kennedy. But I think the result of all that is the sense that, and the belief that the right had to have this strong media, ecosystem, and that exists now. And it sure does not exist for the lefties at all.
Little bit more historical context for our listeners, Margaret. Elon Musk. I mean, this is sort of William Randolph Hearst times 100. I mean, I can't remember anybody just flooding the zone like he has in all forms of media, and he owns this huge platform. What is that doing to the media space?
Musk is, I guess, the richest person on the planet, and he's very close to Trump. And, when he took over Twitter, Twitter really was, it isn't so much anymore, but it really was the place to, it was kind of the town square for journalists. And his takeover of it has destroyed it as a platform because it's overrun with, white supremacists, and the algorithm really elevates people who have very hateful voices. I haven't left it as many people have, but it is kind of a cesspool, honestly. Um, but it's my cesspool, I guess. At any rate, Musk is a powerful figure and now so close to Trump. And I don't know whether that can last, to be honest, because I think that they both have such huge egos that it's hard to imagine them walking in lockstep for very long. But I guess we will see.
I agree with that assessment. Margaret, I have one last question, which is I want you to put on your old hat, your editor's hat, and pretend that there you are in Washington and you are running the Washington Post. You're the new editor. What advice would you give to the reporters in the newsroom in covering the Trump administration and lessons learned from the last time round?
Tell my reporters and editors that we must fulfill our mission, which is to inform the public and to help to hold powerful people and institutions accountable. That is our role. It's not to represent both sides equally. It's not to do some kind of performative neutrality. It's not to increase clicks. It is to fulfill the journalistic mission, which is actually laid out in the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the First Amendment. And that if that means that we're going to be attacked or sued or persecuted in some way, we'll deal with that as it comes up. But go do your job and make sure that your audience is the American people, not the shareholders or the people who pay the bills. That would be my advice.
Where are you, Margaret, on this whole question of normalization, that you've got a figure who is really without parallel in the history of the Republic? The American press has been accused of sane washing, all these phrases. How do you think the American press has acquitted itself this time round?
No, it's been spotty. I think that the New York Times has sort of set the tone in kind of there's a white glove treatment of Trump at times. While they have done a lot of excellent investigative work, and we all could tell from reading the New York Times exactly who Trump was, there's still a kind of a, not wanting to really go too far in the way there is a normalizing and a so-called sane washing of the things he says, so as to sort of treat him like a normal candidate or a normal president or whatever he may be at a particular time. For example, everything is called controversial or unorthodox when it's actually lunatic and never heard, unprecedented in its lunacy, but we have to call it slightly offbeat. Or people will always talk about Trump's freewheeling style. Well, if you ever watched any of these campaign rallies, we're talking about some really crazy stuff, and then the way it would be presented would be kind of, yes, his style is unorthodox. So yes, I do think there's a lot of normalizing that's gone on, and it's regrettable.
So net, if when you look at the next 4 years, how are you feeling?
I'm always feeling hopeful because I'm a hopeful person. So I think that, the American experiment is continuing. I don't expect it to go down entirely in the next 4 years. I think it's going to be very challenging. And when we see how Trump is starting off, he hasn't even taken office yet. And the people he's choosing to run the government, that part of it is scary and disheartening. But nevertheless, I think we will endure, and that journalism needs to be a big and constructive part of that.
Final point is about the fates of Voice of America and National Public Radio, which are quite dependent on the government shining a benevolent light on them. Could we see those disappear?
National Public Radio will not disappear because it actually gets a pretty small percentage of its money directly from the government. Voice of America is more vulnerable because it really is within the direct purview of the federal government. And in the first Trump administration, he appointed somebody who started to really cut into editorial independence. So I worry more about that. And it's not just Voice of America, it's Radio Free Asia, it's Radio Free Europe, it's all of those that are kind of grouped in that institution, and not just from a funding point of view, but from an editorial independence point of view. Because if it's used as a pro-Trump propaganda outlet, that's not fulfilling its mission.
Thanks for joining us. We may come back to you in a few months' time to see how things
how it's going. Very good. Thank you both very much. It's good
Margaret,
to be with you.
It was a delight talking with you.
Thanks
so much for spending time.